The alarm didn't go off. It never did anymore. Grace had sold it 3 months ago for grocery money. Instead, her body woke itself at 5:15 in the morning, trained by exhaustion and necessity, into a rhythm that didn't require technology. She opened her eyes in the darkness of the studio apartment, 200 square feet of peeling wallpaper and broken promises on the south side of Chicago. The ceiling had a water stain shaped like a hand reaching down, as if trying to pull her under. Some mornings, Grace wished it would. 3 hours of sleep. That was all she'd managed after her bar shift ended at 2:30. Her body ached in places she didn't know could ache. A deep tiredness that had settled into her bones and refused to leave. Beside her on the sofa bed, Sophie slept curled into a tight ball, her inhaler clutched in one hand like a lifeline, because that's exactly what it was. Grace's eyes moved to the small orange bottle on the milk crate they used as a nightstand. 3 days of medication left. Maybe 4 if Sophie skipped the morning dose. Which she wouldn't, which she couldn't. Grace's phone screen glowed harsh in the pre-dawn darkness. The notification sat there like a tombstone. Final notice. 3 days to pay $2,300 or eviction proceedings would begin. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Then they'd be on the street. She moved carefully, not wanting to wake Sophie, and padded across the cold linoleum to the ancient refrigerator that hummed and wheezed like it had asthma too. The light inside had burned out months ago. She felt in the darkness. 2 slices of bread, hard at the edges. A carton of milk that had expired 3 days ago. Half a jar of peanut butter, the cheap kind that separated into oil and paste. Grace closed the door quietly and leaned her forehead against it. The metal was cold. Everything in this apartment was cold. She pulled her phone out again and opened her bank app, even though she knew what it would say. $47.23. That was everything. That was her entire safety net, stretched so thin it was transparent. The glass jar under the sink held her tips from the diner. She'd been saving for 2 months. Grace counted the crumpled bills and coins in the dim light filtering through the grimy window. $186. Still $2,114 short. The math was simple and devastating. Her eyes landed on the cardboard box she kept under the bed, the one Sophie didn't know about. Grace pulled it out carefully, the tape brittle and yellowed. Inside, beneath some old clothes she couldn't bear to throw away, was the letter. Northwestern University School of Nursing. We are pleased to inform you of your acceptance. Dated 3 years ago. Grace had been 25 then, still believing in futures and second chances. She'd worked double shifts for 6 months to save the application fee. The acceptance had arrived the same week her bicycle was hit by a drunk driver running a red light. No bike. No acceptance. Just $47,000 in medical debt that followed her like a shadow she couldn't outrun. She folded the letter carefully and put it back in its grave. Just survive today, Grace whispered to herself. The mantra that had kept her breathing for 3 years. Then tomorrow. Then the day after that. The bathroom was the size of a closet. Grace splashed cold water on her face. The hot water had been shut off for non-payment last month and stared at the stranger in the mirror. 28 years old but looking 40. Dark circles under her eyes like bruises, cheekbones sharp enough to cut. When had she gotten so thin? She pulled on her waitress uniform, the white button-down shirt and black pants that smelled permanently of coffee and fryer grease no matter how many times she washed them. The shirt was loose now. Everything was loose now. Grace wrote a note on the back of an old envelope and left it on the counter. Went to work early. Love you. G. She looked at Sophie one last time before leaving. 18 years old and still so young, still untouched by the worst of what life could do. Grace had made sure of that. Whatever it cost her, whatever it took, Sophie would have better. Sophie would have everything Grace couldn't. The door closed with a soft click behind her at 5:45. Outside, Chicago was still dark, the winter sky heavy and threatening. Grace started walking. Her bicycle had been broken for a week. The chain snapped beyond her ability to fix it. Walking to Rosie's diner took 40 minutes. 40 minutes in the cold. 40 minutes while her feet throbbed in her worn sneakers, the soles so thin she could feel every crack in the sidewalk. She passed a homeless man sleeping in a doorway, covered in cardboard and plastic bags. Grace slowed, remembering. 3 months, 7 years ago, when she'd been 16 and suddenly alone with an 8-year-old sister. 3 months in a women's shelter, sleeping with one eye open, protecting Sophie from everything and everyone. 3 months that taught Grace what desperation really meant. The man stirred, and Grace moved on. She had nothing to give him. She was barely surviving herself. Her mind catalogued the day ahead as her feet carried her through the dark streets. Morning shift at the diner, 6 to 2. Afternoon cleaning job at the office building, 3 to 6. Evening shift at the bar, 8 until close. 3 jobs, 4 hours of sleep, 0 days off in 3 years. The numbers ran through her head like a prayer, or a curse. $2,300 for rent, $200 for Sophie's medication, $47 in the bank, $186 in tips, bills stacking up like bodies after a war. Grace's breath came out in white clouds. Her fingers were numb, but she kept walking, one foot in front of the other, because that's what you did. You survived, you kept going, you didn't give up. For Sophie, she whispered to the empty street. Everything for Sophie. She didn't know that in less than 3 hours, everything would change. She didn't know that walking into Rosie's diner this morning would set in motion a series of events that would shatter her carefully constructed survival into 1,000 pieces. She didn't know that today, she would make a choice that would save a life and destroy her own. Grace pushed through the door of Rosie's diner at exactly 6 o'clock, her breath still coming in white puffs from the cold. The bell above the door chimed, a sound as familiar as her own heartbeat. Rosie was already there. She was always there first, a 70-year-old woman with steel gray hair and hands that had been making coffee since before Grace was born. She looked up from wiping down the counter, and her weathered face creased with concern. "Kid, you look worse every day." Grace forced a smile and headed toward the back. "Good morning to you too, Rosie. Don't deflect. When's the last time you slept more than 3 hours?" "I sleep fine." Grace grabbed her apron from the hook, tying it around her waist with practiced efficiency. "Ready to start?" Rosie's eyes followed her, sharp and knowing, but she let it drop. For now, the diner was exactly what it had always been, a working-class institution that time had forgotten. Red vinyl booths patched with duct tape, checkered linoleum floor, worn smooth in the paths between tables, windows that hadn't been properly cleaned in a decade, filmed with the grease and grime of 10,000 breakfasts. The air smelled like coffee and bacon grease and something indefinably comforting that Grace could never quite name. It smelled like survival. The morning regulars began filtering in as the sky outside shifted from black to gray. Mr. Patterson, first, an elderly man who'd been coming here since the 1970s. He shuffled to his usual spot at the counter, and Grace already had his mug filled with black coffee before he sat down. "Morning, Mr. P. Toast with butter today?" "You're a mind reader, Grace." His hands shook slightly as he wrapped them around the warm ceramic. "Best waitress in Chicago. Only because I remember you like your toast almost burned." She smiled, and this time it was real. The door chimed again. Mrs. Chen, a middle-aged woman in a business suit, who Grace knew worked somewhere downtown. Always polite, always left a decent tip. Grace didn't know that in a few hours, Mrs. Chen would show up as FBI agent Sarah Chen, and Grace's life would never be the same. Then Marcus, a construction worker with cement dust permanently ground into his hands and a kind face that reminded Grace of what fathers were supposed to be like. "Morning, Grace." He slid into a booth. "You working doubles again?" Grace pulled out her order pad, though she didn't need it. She'd memorized everyone's orders months ago, just making ends meet. "You work too hard, kid. Not hard enough." Apparently, she kept her voice light, but something in Marcus's expression said he understood. Understood what it meant to work until your body screamed and still come up short. The morning rush began, and Grace moved through it like a dancer who'd perfected the choreography through repetition. Coffee pot in one hand, plates balanced on her arm, remembering everything, forgetting nothing. Smile, take orders, deliver food, refill coffee, smile again. Don't think about the eviction notice. Don't think about Sophie's medication. Don't think, just move. At 8 o'clock, Rosie called from the kitchen. "Grace, back here." Grace wiped her hands on her apron and pushed through the swinging door. Rosie stood by the prep station, holding a sandwich wrapped in paper. "Eat." "I'm not hungry, Rosie. Don't lie to me." Rosie's voice was sharp, but her eyes were soft. "When's the last time you ate? And don't you dare say yesterday, because I saw you give your lunch to that homeless woman on the corner." Grace said nothing. "That's what I thought." Rosie thrust the sandwich at her. "Eat, or I'll fire you." "You can't fire me. You're short-staffed. Try me." Grace took the sandwich. Her hands trembled slightly as she unwrapped it. Ham and cheese. Simple. Perfect. She took a bite, and the taste exploded in her mouth. She hadn't realized how hungry she was. Hadn't let herself realize. The second bite came faster, and then she was eating like someone starving, which she was. 30 hours since her last real meal. Tears stung her eyes. "That landlord still giving you hell?" Rosie asked quietly. Grace swallowed, 3 days to pay or I'm out. How much you short? $2,300. The number tasted like ashes. Rosie was quiet for a moment. Then, Grace, let me... No. The word came out sharper than Grace intended. No, Rosie. I can't take your money. You're stubborn as a mule, girl. My mama raised me that way. Grace tried to smile. At least, that's what you always tell me. Your mama would have been proud of you. Rosie's hand landed on Grace's shoulder, warm and solid, proud and worried sick, just like I am. Grace's throat tightened. I hope so. By 8:30, the diner had filled up. Grace moved back onto the floor, her temporary fullness giving her a burst of energy she knew wouldn't last. She smiled at customers, refilled coffee, took orders, delivered plates, pretended everything was fine, pretended she wasn't drowning. At 8:45, Grace was refilling Mr. Patterson's coffee when she noticed the vehicle outside. A black Mercedes G-Wagon, sleek and expensive and completely out of place in this neighborhood. It sat at the curb like a panther among pigeons. Something about it made Grace's instincts prickle. She'd learned to trust those instincts living on the street, learned that survival meant paying attention to things that didn't fit. The door chimed. A woman entered first, older, maybe 50, in clothes that were expensive but understated. Her eyes swept the diner with the nervous energy of someone expecting trouble. Behind her, clinging to her hand, was a little girl, 5 years old maybe, dark hair, gray eyes wide with fear. She wore a dress that probably cost more than Grace made in a week, and clutched a stuffed bear to her chest like it was the only solid thing in a tilting world. They moved to booth 7 in the corner. The woman Helen. Grace would later learn positioning herself so she could see both the door and the windows. The little girl slid into the booth and became very still, very small. Grace approached with menus and her professional smile. Good morning. What can I get you? Helen barely looked at the menu. Pancakes. No syrup. Orange juice. No pulp. She glanced at the child. She doesn't eat much. Grace knelt down so she was at eye level with the little girl. Something in those gray eyes called to her, some recognition of fear and loneliness that Grace knew intimately. Hi, sweetie. What's your teddy bear's name? The girl said nothing, didn't even look up, just held the bear tighter. Helen started to apologize, but Grace raised a hand gently. That's okay, you don't have to talk. Grace smiled at the bear. He looks very brave though. I bet he keeps you safe. The little girl's eyes flickered up, just for a second. The tiniest connection, thin as spider silk. I'll make those pancakes extra special, Grace said softly, standing. Something protective had awoken in her chest. That same instinct that made her stand between Sophie and their father's rage, that made her give her lunch to strangers hungrier than herself. She brought the order to the kitchen, but her attention kept drifting back to booth 7, the woman checking her phone nervously, the little girl arranging her bear just so, not eating, not speaking. At 8:52, Grace was pouring coffee for Mr. Patterson when she glanced out the window. 3 more black SUVs had appeared. They weren't parked like normal cars. They were positioned. Strategic. Wrong. Grace's heart kicked in her chest. Something was wrong. She looked back at booth 7, at the little girl with the gray eyes and the expensive dress and the bear named Moonlight, at the woman who kept checking the door. Grace's instincts screamed, and then the door opened. 4 men entered at 8:53 exactly. Grace knew they were dangerous before they took 3 steps. It was in the way they moved, coordinated, purposeful, scanning the room with eyes that catalogued exits and threats in seconds. They wore expensive suits that did nothing to hide what they were. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She'd seen men like this before. Remembered being 14, hiding in a closet with Sophie while men just like these stood in their living room, voices low and threatening, discussing what happened to people who didn't pay their debts, her father's gambling debts, his mistakes that his daughters had to hide from. The lead man's eyes swept the diner and locked onto booth 7. Helen's phone clattered to the floor. Her face went white as chalk. Everybody down. The world exploded into chaos. Customers screamed. Chairs scraped and crashed as people dove under tables. Mr. Patterson hit the floor. Mrs. Chen dropped her briefcase. Rosie's voice cut through the panic. Call 911. Grace saw it happen as if in slow motion, the lead man's hand moving inside his jacket, the gun emerging, black and deadly, the barrel swinging toward booth 7. Isabella stood frozen in the middle of the booth. Not crying, not moving, just standing there with those wide gray eyes and the bear clutched to her chest, too terrified even to scream. Helen tried to get up, tried to reach the child, but one of the men shoved her down hard. The little girl had no one. Grace's mind flashed to another time, another place. Sophie at 5 years old, standing in the kitchen while their father stumbled drunk toward her, a beer bottle raised. Grace throwing herself between them, taking the blow meant for her sister. Not again, not another child. The coffee pot fell from Grace's hand and shattered. She was already running. First second, her feet found purchase on the slick floor. 10 feet between her and booth 7. Second. She closed half the distance, her body moving on pure instinct. No thought, no hesitation. Third second, she reached Isabella and grabbed her, pulling the child down beneath the table with a strength she didn't know she possessed. Fourth second, Grace covered Isabella's small body with her own, making herself a shield. Fifth second, she adjusted her position, arms wrapping around the girl's head, tucking Isabella's face into her chest. Sixth second, I've got you, baby. Close your eyes. Isabella's small hands clutched at Grace's uniform, finally finding her voice to cry. The sobs shook her tiny frame, muffled against Grace's shoulder. It's okay, sweetie. I've got you. We're brave together. The chaos continued around them. More shouting, glass shattering, the front window exploding inward. Gunshots outside, sharp cracks that made Grace flinch and tighten her hold. Someone screaming, the acrid smell of something burning. Grace felt every tremor that ran through Isabella's body and held her closer, tighter. Her own heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her chest. Every muscle was tensed, waiting for the impact of a bullet she might not even feel. If they shoot, Grace thought with crystalline clarity, I die first. She lives, scared. Isabella's whisper was barely audible. Me too, honey. Grace's voice was surprisingly steady. But I won't let go. I promise. I won't let go. Time stretched. 2 minutes that felt like 2 hours. Grace counted Isabella's heartbeats against her chest, fast as a bird's. Whispered nonsense, comfort words. Hummed a tuneless melody. Anything to keep the little girl from drowning in terror. Then, suddenly silence. The eerie quiet after violence. Grace's ears rang. She didn't dare move. Heavy footsteps, multiple sets, getting closer. A voice, deep and cold as winter. Where is she? Helen's sobbing response. Booth 7. A waitress has her. The footsteps came faster. Grace felt Isabella try to burrow deeper into her arms. She adjusted her grip, making sure every inch of the child was covered, protected. A presence appeared beside the booth. Close. Grace could feel the displacement of air, hear breathing above her. Let me see her. Now. The voice was commanding, absolute, the kind of voice that expected instant obedience. But Grace didn't move. Couldn't move. Her entire being was focused on the child in her arms. Slowly, Grace looked up. The man standing over them was tall, at least 6'3", in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Grace made in 6 months. Dark hair touched with gray at the temples, a face that was all sharp angles and hard lines, with a scar cutting through his jaw. But it was his eyes that caught her. Gray eyes, Isabella's eyes, gray eyes that should have been cold but were filled with something Grace recognized. Absolute terror barely held in check. She's okay. Grace's voice came out steady despite the shaking in her limbs. She's not hurt. She didn't let go. Their eyes locked. Grace saw the exact moment his assessment shifted from threat evaluation to something else. He'd been expecting fear, maybe submission. Instead, he saw defiance, protection. A waitress with coffee stains on her uniform who refused to move, who had put herself between his child and danger. His expression flickered. Surprise. Then something softer. Something almost like wonder. Who are you? His voice had dropped, meant only for her now. Grace. Grace. He said it like he was memorizing it. I need to see my daughter. The word hit Grace like a physical blow. She loosened her grip, and Isabella's tear-stained face emerged. Daddy! Alexander Romano, because that's who this dangerous, terrifying man was, dropped to his knees and lifted Isabella into his arms. His hands shook slightly as he ran them over her, checking for injuries with a thoroughness born of panic barely controlled. Are you hurt, baby? Tell Daddy. Are you hurt anywhere? No. Isabella's voice was small. Grace saved me. Grace is brave. Alexander's eyes found Grace again over his daughter's head. She was still on the floor, legs shaking too badly to stand, covered in cold coffee and sweat, and the aftermath of adrenaline. The gratitude in his expression was naked, raw, and something else Grace couldn't name: curiosity, respect, awe. Thank you. Simple words, weighted with everything unsaid. More men flooded in, these ones clearly with Alexander. One of them broad-shouldered, Military bearing began barking orders. "Boss!" Moretti's men fled. "They're gone." Alexander's eyes never left Grace. "Make sure." Rosie broke through the cordon of security, falling to her knees beside Grace. "Kid, are you okay?" Grace nodded. But the adrenaline was draining now, leaving nothing but shaking and cold. Her knees tried to buckle as she attempted to stand. Strong hands caught her. The military man, Marcus. "Easy, miss. I'm fine. Grace's teeth chattered. "I need to work." "My shift." Alexander Romano stepped closer. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but left no room for argument. "You need to breathe." In the distance, sirens wailed. Grace sat back down, because she had no choice. Her legs wouldn't hold her. She watched Alexander Romano hold his daughter. Watched the way the most dangerous man in Chicago trembled slightly as he pressed his face into his child's hair. And she thought, what have I just done? The police came in waves, first responders, then detectives, then men in suits who looked too clean for Chicago PD. They cordoned off the diner with yellow tape and asked the same questions over and over until Grace's head spun. She sat in Rosie's cramped back office, wrapped in a scratchy blanket that smelled like grease and dishwater, a cup of tea cooling in her hands, untouched. Rosie had forced both on her, along with a fierce hug that had nearly broken Grace's composure completely. Through the grimy window, Grace could see Alexander Romano standing beside one of the black SUVs, Isabella pressed against his side. He was speaking to the detectives with the kind of calm authority that suggested he'd done this before. Helen hovered nearby, pale and shaking. Grace's hands wouldn't stop trembling. A knock at the door. The broad-shouldered man from earlier entered. Marcus. She'd heard Alexander call him. He had the bearing of military, the careful movements of someone trained to assess threats. "Miss Hartford?" "Mr. Romano would like to speak with you." Grace's throat tightened. Is the little girl okay?" Something softened in Marcus's hard face. "Thanks to you. Yes." He stepped aside, and Alexander Romano entered the small office. Without Isabella, without the vulnerability Grace had seen in his eyes when he'd held his daughter, this was the man Chicago feared controlled, assessing, dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with guns. He sat in the chair across from her, and for a long moment, he simply studied her. Grace forced herself not to look away, though every instinct screamed to make herself small, invisible. That was incredibly stupid. Grace's spine stiffened. "Excuse me?" And incredibly brave. His voice softened. "Thank you. Grace's hands tightened on the teacup. Anyone would have done it. "No." The word was flat, certain. His eyes flicked toward the window where Helen stood, the woman who'd dropped and covered her own head. They wouldn't have. Silence stretched between them. Grace found her voice first. "Is she really okay, Isabella?" Alexander's entire posture changed. The harsh lines of his face eased, just slightly. "She's safe. Because of you." Grace stood, her legs still unsteady but functional. "I should get back to work. My shift." "Wait." Alexander rose too, his height suddenly intimidating in the small space. "I want to offer you something." Suspicion coiled in Grace's stomach. In her experience, when powerful men offered things, there were strings attached, strings that strangled. "What?" Alexander measured his words carefully. "My daughter has autism, high functioning, but she struggles with people. New situations. Trust." He paused. "We've gone through 7 nannies in 2 years. Isabella won't connect with anyone, won't speak to most people. But you, I just met her. She asked for you." Alexander's voice was rough. "After the police came, after everything settled, she asked if Grace was okay. She never asks for anyone." Grace's heart did something complicated in her chest. "I want to offer you a position, full-time caregiver for Isabella, $5,000 a week." The number hit Grace like a physical blow. Her jaw went slack. That's negotiable. $7,500 if you prefer." Grace's mind spun. That kind of money would solve everything. The rent, Sophie's medication, food, bills, everything. But nothing was free. Nothing was ever free. "Mr. Romano, I can't. I have jobs, my sister flexible hours. We'll work around your sister's needs." "Why me?" The question burst out before Grace could stop it. "You don't know me. You don't know anything about me." Alexander's gray eyes, Isabella's eyes, held hers. "I know you threw yourself over my daughter without hesitation. I know in a room full of adults, you were the only one who moved. I know my daughter looked at you with trust." He leaned forward slightly. "That's all I need to know." Grace's mind raced. $7,500 a week. 52 weeks a year. Nearly $400,000. It was impossible. It was salvation. It was a trap. Guns, danger, men in suits trying to kill a 5-year-old girl. Mafia. Because that's what Alexander Romano was. What he had to be. Grace wasn't naive. Mr. Romano, I appreciate the offer, but I don't take charity. His expression hardened. This isn't charity, it's a job. My daughter needs you. I'm willing to pay for that need. I need time to think. Alexander reached into his jacket. Grace flinched before she could stop herself and pulled out a business card. Heavy stock, embossed letters. 24 hours. Call this number. He stood, moved to the door, then turned back. Grace. His voice was different now, colder. Those men today were after Isabella. Vincent Moretti's men. Anyone close to her becomes a target. Consider that too. The door closed behind him with a quiet click. Grace stared at the card in her hands. Black with silver lettering. Alexander D. Romano, and a phone number. No title, no company. Just a name that everyone in Chicago knew meant power and violence and things Grace had spent her whole life trying to avoid. The door opened again. Rosie, her face lined with worry. What did he want? Grace told her, watched Rosie's eyebrows climb toward her hairline. That's a lot of money, kid. It's dangerous money. Rosie sat down heavily in the chair Alexander had vacated. And staying here? Being broke? Getting evicted in 3 days, that's safe? At least it's my danger. My choice. Your choice is starving yourself so Sophie can eat. Your choice is working yourself to death at 28. Rosie's voice was gentle but firm. Maybe it's time to choose differently. Grace had no answer to that. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sophie. Doctor called. Need to refill prescription. It's $200. Do we have it? Grace closed her eyes. Felt the weight of the business card in her pocket. Felt the weight of the eviction notice she'd shoved in her other pocket this morning. Felt the weight of 3 years of survival crushing down on her shoulders. I need to go. She stood. My shift. You're done for today. Rosie's tone left no room for argument. Go home. Think. Really think, Grace. Not just about what you're afraid of, but what Sophie needs. What you need. The walk home was longer than 40 minutes. Grace's feet moved on autopilot while her mind spun in circles. She passed the homeless man again, still huddled in his doorway. Past the corner store, where she sometimes shoplifted bread when things got really bad. Past the pawn shop where she'd sold everything of value she'd ever owned. This was her world. Small and mean and hard, but it was hers. She understood its rules, its dangers, its limits. Alexander Romano's world was something else entirely. Something bigger and more dangerous and completely unknown. $7,500 a week. Grace touched the card in her pocket. What was she more afraid of? The danger she knew, or the salvation she didn't? Grace pushed open the apartment door at 6 o'clock, hours earlier than Sophie would expect her. She'd skipped the cleaning job, called in sick to the bar. The lie tasted like ash, but she couldn't face strangers tonight. Couldn't smile and serve drinks while her world tilted on its axis. Grace. Sophie looked up from her textbooks, delight transforming her face. You're home. How was? She stopped. Saw something in Grace's expression. What happened? Are you okay? Grace set down her bag carefully, buying time to arrange her face into something less raw. There was an incident at work. Incident? Sophie stood, fear creeping into her voice. Grace, you're scaring me. There was an attempted robbery at the diner. Grace kept her voice level, clinical. Someone tried to hurt a customer, a little girl. I helped her. Everyone's safe now. The sanitized version. No guns, no mafia, no Alexander Romano with his gray eyes and dangerous offer. Sophie's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God, you could have been killed. But I wasn't. Grace forced a smile. I'm fine. Sophie started to respond, then broke into a coughing fit. Deep, racking coughs that shook her thin frame. She reached for her inhaler on the counter, shook it. The rattle was too light, too empty. Grace's heart sank. Soph, did you get the refill? Sophie wouldn't meet her eyes. Not yet. Waiting for, for money. I'm sorry. Sophie's voice was small, guilty. I can skip doses. I'll be careful. I won't overdo it. No. The word came out fierce. Absolute. Absolutely not. But we don't have I'll figure it out. Grace pulled Sophie into a hug. Felt how fragile her sister was. All bird bones and hope. I always do. Dinner was 1 can of chicken noodle soup, split between 2 bowls. Grace gave Sophie the larger portion and pretended not to notice. They sat at their tiny table, really just a card table with wobbly legs, and Sophie pulled out her homework. Look. She showed Grace her latest exam, A- in anatomy and physiology. Pride swelled in Grace's chest. Bringing tears, she blinked away quickly. I'm so proud, Soph. One day I'll be a nurse. Sophie's smile was bright, untouched by the worry that lived permanently in Grace's bones. I'll take care of you for once. You can stop working yourself to death. You already take care of me, kiddo. The phone rang, shattering the fragile peace. Grace knew before she answered. Knew from the ringtone, the timing, the way her stomach dropped. Miss Hartford. The landlord's voice was flat, administrative. Friday is the deadline. $2,300 or eviction proceedings begin. Grace's hand tightened on the phone. I understand. I'll have it. She wouldn't. They both knew it. See that you do. Click. Grace set the phone down with exaggerated care. Was that Sophie started? Nothing. Don't worry, Grace. Sophie's voice was different now. Older. Tired. How bad is it? We're fine. You always say that. Sophie stood, anger flashing in her eyes. Even when we're not. Even when I can see you're falling apart. Because we always figure it out. Grace heard the desperation in her own voice. We always do. Do we? Sophie gestured at the apartment, at their reality. Or do you just work harder? Sleep less? Eat nothing so I can eat something? Grace had no answer. Evening settled heavy and dark. Sophie returned to her textbooks, but her focus kept drifting. Grace pretended to read a library book, but the words swam meaninglessly. Her mind was calculating, always calculating. Tips this week. $186. Bar wages if she'd worked tonight. $340. Total. $526. Still short. $1,774. Plus Sophie's medication. $200. Plus food, utilities, the broken bicycle, the winter coat Sophie needed. Grace's eyes drifted to Alexander Romano's business card on the table. Heavy black stock with silver lettering. A phone number that could change everything. Sophie noticed. What's that? Nothing. But Sophie was already picking it up, reading the name. Alexander Romano? Who's that? Grace's throat tightened. The father of the girl I helped today. Why do you have his card? No good way to answer. Grace settled for partial truth. He offered me a job. Sophie's eyes lit up. What kind of job? Taking care of his daughter. She has autism. Needs help connecting with people. Grace! That's amazing. Sophie's enthusiasm was painful. How much does it pay? A lot. Grace looked away. But it's complicated. How complicated? How to explain? How to tell her 18-year-old sister that the job came with guns and danger and a world Grace had spent her life trying to avoid? Just trust me. It's not right for us. Sophie's face changed. The hope drained out of it, replaced by something harder. Not right? Grace, we're going to be homeless in 3 days. I'll find another way. There is no other way. Sophie's voice rose, cracked. You're working 3 jobs. You don't sleep. You don't eat. You're working yourself to death and it's still not enough. Sophie, no. Tears streamed down Sophie's face. I'm not a kid anymore. I see you, Grace. I see what you're doing to yourself for me. You're killing yourself and I can't watch it anymore. Because you're all I have. The words tore out of Grace, raw and desperate. You're all I have in this world, Sophie. I can't fail you. I can't let you down like everyone else did. Silence crashed between them. Sophie crying, Grace crying. 2 sisters who'd survived everything except, maybe, this moment. Sophie crossed to Grace and hugged her hard. And you're all I have. But I don't want you dying to keep me alive. That's not living, Grace. That's just slower dying. I won't die. I promise. Then take the job. Sophie pulled back, looked Grace in the eyes. Whatever it is, whatever complications it has, we need help. You need help. And maybe, just maybe, it's okay to accept it. Grace had no words left. Later, after Sophie had cried herself to sleep, Grace sat alone in the darkness. 11 o'clock. The city sounds filtered through the thin walls, sirens, shouting, someone's television too loud. She pulled out the nursing school letter from its box under the bed. Read it by the light of her phone. We are pleased to accept you into Northwestern University's School of Nursing. 3 years old. 3 years of might have beens. She looked at Sophie, peaceful in sleep despite everything. Looked at the eviction notice on the counter. Looked at Alexander Romano's card. $7,500 a week. Salvation or damnation, maybe both. Grace picked up her phone before she could think better of it. Dialed the number with shaking fingers. It rang once, twice. Romano. His voice was clipped, alert despite the late hour. Grace's mouth was dry. Mr. Romano. It's Grace Hartford. A pause. When he spoke again, His voice held something she couldn't name. Surprise, maybe. Or satisfaction. Grace. She closed her eyes. Thought of Sophie's empty inhaler, the eviction notice. 3 years of surviving but never living. I'll take the job. The words hung in the air, irrevocable. On the other end of the line, Alexander Romano said quietly, I'll send Marcus for you tomorrow morning. 8 o'clock. Okay. Grace? His voice softened slightly. You won't regret this. But as Grace hung up and looked at the sleeping sister she'd do anything to protect, she wondered if that was a promise anyone could keep. There was no turning back now. Marcus arrived at 8 o'clock exactly, the black SUV idling at the curb like a predator waiting. Grace stood on the sidewalk with a single duffel bag containing everything she owned that mattered, some clothes, Sophie's childhood photos, the nursing school letter she couldn't bring herself to throw away. Sophie was at school, safely unaware of the details. Grace had left a note. New job. Live-in position. I'll call tonight. Love you always. The drive from South Side to North Shore was only 12 miles, but it felt like crossing into another country. The neighborhoods transformed gradually, crumbling buildings giving way to renovated brownstones, then tree-lined streets, then estates hidden behind walls and gates. Grace's anxiety built with every mile. Her fingers twisted in her lap. Marcus noticed but said nothing, his eyes on the road, his bearing military precise. Mr. Romano's estate is secure, he finally said. Don't be alarmed by the security measures. How secure? Grace's voice came out smaller than she intended. Very. That was when Grace saw the gates. Iron, 12 feet high, with cameras mounted every few yards. A guardhouse, men with earpieces and guns barely concealed under their jackets. Marcus lowered the window, nodded to the guard, and the gates swung open with mechanical precision. This is a lot. Marcus glanced at her, something almost sympathetic in his hard face. Standard precautions, Miss Hartford. You'll get used to it. Grace doubted that. The estate appeared through the trees, massive, more fortress than home. Stone and glass and angles designed to intimidate. 3 stories, wings spreading like arms ready to either embrace or crush. More cameras, more men. The driveway circled a fountain that probably cost more than Grace would make in her lifetime. Staff waited at the entrance, formal as palace servants. A housekeeper in black, a butler in a suit that put Grace's entire wardrobe to shame. Grace climbed out of the SUV in her worn jeans and old jacket, feeling every thread of poverty clinging to her skin. Alexander Romano appeared in the doorway. His suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, his posture commanding. This wasn't the terrified father from the diner. This was the man who controlled half of Chicago's underworld. Miss Hartford, welcome. His voice was cooler than she remembered, more professional. The businessman, not the father. Grace felt the distance like a wall between them. Marcus will show you around. We'll discuss details after you've settled. He disappeared back inside before Grace could respond. The tour was overwhelming. Room after enormous room living spaces that could fit Grace's entire apartment 5 times over. Marble floors, original artwork, furniture that looked like it belonged in museums. Grace walked through it all, feeling like an imposter, waiting for someone to realize the mistake and send her back where she belonged. Marcus led her upstairs to what he called her room. Grace stepped inside and stopped breathing. The bedroom was bigger than her apartment, a king-sized bed with linens that looked like clouds, windows overlooking gardens, a sitting area with a couch and chairs. The bathroom was marble and gold, with a jacuzzi tub Grace couldn't imagine using. This is too much. The words came out before Grace could stop them. Mr. Romano insists his staff are comfortable. Marcus's tone was neutral, but the word staff hit Grace like a slap. A reminder of what she was here. Not a guest, not family. Staff. The closet was walk-in, empty except for hangers. We'll provide appropriate clothing, Marcus said. Grace stiffened. I have clothes. Mr. Romano prefers a certain standard for his household. Marcus was diplomatic, but firm. You represent his family now. There are expectations. I'm not a doll to be dressed up. No, ma'am. But security requires. He paused. You need to blend in. Look like you belong. It's safer that way. Security or control? Grace heard the edge in her own voice. Marcus almost smiled. Both, probably. Before Grace could argue further, Marcus led her back downstairs to the living room. Alexander stood near the windows, and in his arms, face hidden in his neck, was Isabella. Bella? Alexander's voice was gentle now, transformed. Remember Grace? From the restaurant? Isabella peeked out, clutching the bare moonlight to her chest. Her gray eyes, so like her father's, were wary. Grace knelt down to Isabella's level, making herself small, non-threatening. "Hi, Bella. You were so brave yesterday." For a long moment, Isabella didn't move. Then slowly, carefully, she stepped forward. From behind her back, she pulled out a piece of paper, a drawing done in crayon, crude but unmistakable. A woman covering a small girl under a table. Grace's throat tightened. "Is this us?" "It's beautiful, sweetie. You saved me." Isabella's whisper was barely audible. "We saved each other." Isabella reached out and touched Grace's hand, just her fingertips against Grace's palm. But the contact was electric. Grace heard Alexander's sharp intake of breath. He started. "She doesn't usually touch people." Grace looked up at him, saw the wonder in his face. "May I sit with you, Bella?" Grace asked softly. Isabella nodded and sat on the couch. Grace settled beside her, close but not crowding. Isabella leaned slightly into Grace's side, still clutching moonlight. Alexander sat across from them, his posture relaxing infinitesimally. "Bella has a routine. Wake at 7, breakfast at 7:30, lessons from 10 to 1 with her teacher, quiet time in the afternoon, dinner at 6, bed by 8. Grace listened, watching Isabella instead of Alexander. The way the little girl's fingers traced patterns on Moonlight's fur. The way she pressed closer to Grace with each passing second. "She needs structure," Alexander continued. "Doesn't like changes, loud sounds, surprises." "What is she like?" Grace interrupted. Alexander blinked, surprised by the question. "Drawing, soft textures, the garden. Can I take her to the garden? Marcus will accompany you." Alexander's voice firmed. "You don't go anywhere without security." "Of course." Grace's frustration leaked through. Alexander stood, his bearing formal again. "There are rules, miss. Hartford. Don't leave the estate without security clearance. Don't discuss family business with anyone. Report any threats immediately to Marcus or myself. You'll be shown the panic room location. Memorize it." "Am I a prisoner?" The question came out sharper than Grace intended. Alexander's eyes went cold. "You're protected. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes." His voice was hard now. "Prisoners don't get paid $7,500 a week." Anger flared in Grace's chest. "Right. Money fixes everything. It fixes most things." The tension crackled between them. Isabella whimpered, sensing the conflict. She tugged on Grace's hand. "Garden now?" Grace's expression softened immediately. "Yes, sweetie. Let's go." The garden was beautiful. Flowers beginning to bloom despite the early spring cold. Paths winding through carefully tended beds. Marcus followed at a distance, ever watchful. Isabella led Grace from plant to plant, her small voice growing stronger with each step. "Pink, soft, smell good." Grace bent to smell the flowers with her. "They're beautiful. Do you help plant them?" "Daddy does. Mommy used to." Grace's heart clenched. "Your mommy liked gardens? Gone now." Isabella's voice was matter of fact, but her eyes were old, like flowers in winter. Grace didn't know what to say to that, didn't know how to explain death to a 5-year-old when she barely understood it herself. "But flowers come back in spring, right?" Grace offered. Isabella thought about this, her small face serious. "Yes, so there's always hope." From his office window, Alexander watched them. His expression was unreadable, but his hands were clenched on the windowsill. Evening came too quickly. Isabella went to bed after dinner, exhausted but peaceful. Grace retreated to her room, her cage, her gilded prison, and sat on the edge of the bed. It was so soft it felt like sinking. She pulled out her phone and texted Sophie. "Started new job. Better pay. Staying here during week. Love you." The response came immediately. "Staying there?" "Grace, what kind of job is this?" Grace's fingers hovered over the keys. "How to explain? I'll explain this weekend. Trust me. It's good." A long pause. Then, "Okay. Be safe." Grace looked around the room. At the expensive furniture, the art on the walls, the bathroom bigger than their kitchen. She caught her reflection in the mirror, same girl, different world. Worn jeans and fear in her eyes, surrounded by wealth she couldn't comprehend. "What am I doing?" she whispered to her reflection. But her reflection had no answers. Only questions Grace was afraid to ask. Outside, security lights illuminated the grounds. In the distance, Grace could see Marcus and other men, always watching, always alert, protecting or imprisoning, maybe both. She lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, thinking of Sophie asleep in their cold apartment, thinking of Isabella drawing pictures of being saved, thinking of Alexander Romano and the dangerous bargain she'd just made. Sleep wouldn't come for hours. And when it did, Grace dreamed of cages made of gold and flowers that died in winter. Grace woke at 6 on Saturday morning, her body's internal alarm clock refusing to acknowledge luxury or rest. For a disoriented moment, she didn't recognize the ceiling too high, too clean, without the water stain shaped like a reaching hand. Then memory crashed back. The Romano estate. Isabella. The decision that couldn't be undone. She found her way to the kitchen, following the smell of coffee. The staff, a young woman in a crisp uniform, startled when Grace appeared. "Miss Hartford, we can bring breakfast to your room. I can get my own coffee." Grace's tone was firmer than she intended. She softened it with a tired smile. "Really? I've been making my own coffee since I was 12. The staff member looked uncertain, like Grace had violated some unspoken protocol, but she stepped aside, and Grace poured herself a mug, the normalcy of the action grounding her in this too-perfect world. At 7 exactly, Isabella appeared in the doorway. She wore pink pajamas with stars, her hair sleep-mussed, moonlight dragging on the floor. She stopped when she saw Grace, uncertainty crossing her small face. Grace sat at the breakfast table and kept her voice gentle. "Good morning, Bella. May I sit with you?" Isabella nodded, a tiny movement. She climbed into the chair farthest from Grace but didn't run. Progress. They ate in comfortable silence. Grace had toast and eggs. Isabella had pancakes, smooth texture. Grace noted, but mostly pushed them around her plate in careful patterns. "Not hungry?" Grace asked. "Food is hard." Isabella's voice was barely a whisper. "Hard how?" "Textures. Wrong." Grace understood immediately. She'd read about sensory issues in autism, back when she'd thought she might actually make it to nursing school. "What textures do you like?" "Smooth. Not bumpy." Grace made a mental note. Smooth foods. No chunks. No unexpected textures. She could work with that. At 10 o'clock, Isabella's teacher arrived. Mrs. Chen was Chinese-American, 50s, with kind eyes and the patience of someone who'd spent decades with children. She set up her materials at the dining table and smiled when Isabella sat down. "Good morning, Isabella. Ready to practice our letters?" 20 minutes later, Isabella threw a crayon across the room. Mrs. Chen sighed, rubbing her temples. "We're having a difficult day." Grace, who'd been watching from the doorway, stepped forward. "May I try, Mrs.?" Chen looked skeptical but gestured for Grace to take over. "If you'd like." Grace knelt beside Isabella's chair, eye level with the little girl. Tears streaked Isabella's face, frustration making her small hands shake. "Colors are hard sometimes." "Huh?" Isabella nodded, hiccuping. "What if we don't color? What if we just talk about colors?" "Talking is hard too." Isabella's voice broke. "Then just show me." "Point." Isabella hesitated, then pointed at the sky through the window. "Blue," Grace said. "Like your daddy's shirt yesterday." Isabella's face lit up. She pointed at the grass. "Green, like Moonlight's ribbon." Isabella pointed at her own shirt, at the table, at Mrs. Chen's pen. The game continued, Isabella growing more animated with each correct answer, the frustration melting away. Mrs. Chen watched with undisguised amazement. This is remarkable. At noon, Alexander appeared for lunch. This was unusual. Marcus had mentioned Mr. Romano typically ate in his office, phone in hand, managing his empire. But today he sat at the table with them, watching Grace cut Isabella's sandwich into perfect squares. "She's comfortable with you," he observed. Grace looked up, caught off guard by his presence. "She's brilliant, so smart. Most people see her as difficult." Something fierce blazed in Grace's chest. "Most people are idiots. She's not difficult. She's different. There's a difference." Alexander studied Grace for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "Thank you for seeing that." The air between them changed, charged with understanding. Grace looked away first, uncomfortable with the intensity. Her mother, Grace started carefully. What was she like? Alexander's guard went up immediately. Kind, patient, everything Bella needed. His voice was distant. "Everything I'm not. I'm sorry she's not here. So am I." The afternoon brought a new conflict. Mrs. Morrison, the head housekeeper, arrived at Grace's room with an army of garment bags. "Mr. Romano requested these for you." Grace unzipped the first bag and froze. Designer dresses, silk blouses, heels that cost more than her monthly rent. Everything screamed money and status and a world Grace didn't belong to. "I can't wear these. I need to move. Play with Bella. Mr. Romano expects a certain standard. Mr. Romano hired me for Bella, not fashion shows." Alexander's voice came from the doorway. Problem? Grace turned, chin raised. Yes, I need jeans and sneakers, not ball gowns. A smile tugged at Alexander's mouth, almost imperceptible. Marcus, take Miss Hartford shopping. Her choice. I can pay. It's part of your compensation. Don't argue. Grace's frustration boiled over. You like controlling everything, don't you? Alexander's expression didn't change. Yes, it keeps people alive. The mall was overwhelming. Marcus drove Grace to an upscale shopping center where even the air smelled expensive. Grace gravitated toward the practical jeans, comfortable shirts, sneakers she could run in if necessary. Boss said, get what you need, Marcus reminded her, gesturing at a designer boutique. This is plenty. Marcus selected a few items himself, a nice sweater, a jacket that would look appropriate at family dinners. Grace let him, too tired to argue. You're not like the others, Marcus said, as they loaded bags into the SUV. Others? Women who've worked for Mr. Romano. Usually they see dollar signs first, Isabella second. Marcus's expression softened. You see, Isabella. Only Isabella. I'm here for Bella, not him. He knows. Marcus started the engine. That's why you're here. Evening came with its own challenge. At 8:30, Isabella still wasn't asleep. Grace found her sitting up in bed, moonlight clutched tight, eyes wide in the darkness. Want me to stay? Isabella nodded. Story? Grace looked around. No books. She hadn't thought to bring any, and Isabella's room was surprisingly bare of them. I'll make one up. She sat on the edge of Isabella's bed and began. Once upon a time, there was a brave little girl who lived in a castle. She had a magic bear who protected her from dragons. The story rambled, improvised, but Isabella's eyes never left Grace's face. Is the girl me? Grace smiled. If you want her to be. And the bear is Moonlight? Exactly. Isabella fell asleep halfway through, her small hand wrapped around Grace's fingers. Grace tried to ease away, but Isabella whimpered, her grip tightening even in sleep. So Grace stayed, settled into the chair beside the bed and let herself drift. She woke hours later to warmth. Someone had covered her with a blanket. Through sleep-heavy eyes, she saw Alexander standing in the doorway, his face softer than she'd ever seen it. Thank you, he whispered, and then he was gone. By Tuesday, Grace had almost forgotten what her old life felt like. The panic of not enough money, not enough food, not enough time. It had faded to background noise. She spent her mornings with Isabella, her afternoons in the garden, her evenings telling stories until the little girl slept. Sophie called while Grace was in the garden. Marcus a respectful distance away. Grace, when are you coming home? Home. The word felt strange. This weekend. I promise. This place. Is it safe? Very. Too safe. Maybe. What does that mean? Grace couldn't explain the golden cage feeling, the way safety could suffocate. Nothing. How are you? Lonely. But I paid rent with the money you sent. How did you get that much? Advance on salary. The lie came easily now. Grace, this job. You'd tell me if something was wrong? Of course. But Grace was lying. Because something was wrong. She was starting to feel comfortable, starting to belong in this world of marble floors and security guards and a little girl who held her hand, starting to forget the constant fear of eviction, of hunger, of watching Sophie's inhaler run empty. And comfort, in Grace's experience, never lasted. It was the calm before the storm, the moment of peace before everything shattered. She looked up at the house, saw Alexander watching from his office window. Their eyes met across the distance. Grace shivered despite the warm sun. Something was coming. She could feel it in her bones, in the way Marcus never quite relaxed, in the tension that lived beneath Alexander's control. The fortress was beautiful, but fortresses were built for war, and Grace was starting to realize she'd walked into the middle of one. Wednesday morning began with the illusion of peace. Grace knelt in the garden beside Isabella, helping the little girl press seeds into dark soil. The sun was warm on Grace's back, and Isabella was laughing a rare, beautiful sound like wind chimes. Flower grow? Isabella asked, patting the earth. In a few weeks, we'll come watch them together. From his office window, Alexander watched them. Almost smiled. Grace caught the movement, looked up, and their eyes met across the distance. Something passed between them, understanding, maybe, or the beginning of trust. Then Marcus appeared at Alexander's shoulder, and the moment shattered. Grace saw Alexander's posture change, saw the warmth drain from his face. He turned away from the window, and Grace's stomach dropped. She knew that look, had seen it on loan sharks' faces, on her father's face before the violence came. Something was wrong. Boss. Marcus's voice was low, urgent. We need to talk." They moved deeper into the office. Marcus spread papers on the desk, surveillance photos, intelligence reports. Moretti's men were spotted. South Side. He checked the paper. Near Grace Hartford's old address. Alexander's face went to ice. They ID'd her. "Looks like it. Sophie Hartford is still at that address. Get her. Now." "On it." Marcus pulled out his phone. "But boss, they're making a move. My sources say within 48 hours. Then we relocate. Lake House. Today." Alexander found Grace still in the garden, teaching Isabella how to water the newly planted seeds. His voice cut through the peace like a blade. "Grace. Inside. Now." The tone froze her blood. Isabella looked up, frightened. "Daddy mad?" Grace forced a smile. "No, sweetie. Keep playing with Mrs. Morrison, okay?" She followed Alexander into his office, dread building with every step. Marcus was there, phone in hand, already mobilizing. "What's wrong?" Alexander didn't soften it. "We're relocating. Tonight." "What? Why?" "Moretti knows who you are. Your sister is at risk." Grace's world tilted. "Sophie? What did you do?" "I'm protecting her." Alexander's voice was steel. "Marcus is bringing her here." "You're not touching my sister." Grace's hands shook with rage and terror. "I'm saving her life." Alexander stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "Moretti will use her to get to you. To get to Isabella. Do you understand? This is my fault." Grace's voice broke. "No, it's mine. I should have moved faster." Something almost like regret flickered in Alexander's eyes. "I'm sorry, Grace, but we're out of time. Where are we going?" "Lake House. Wisconsin. Remote. Secure. For how long?" "Until it's safe." "And if it's never safe?" Grace heard the hysteria creeping into her voice. Alexander didn't answer. The silence was answer enough. Marcus and his team reached Grace's apartment in 15 minutes. Sophie sat at the kitchen table, headphones on, textbooks spread around her, studying for her anatomy exam, completely unaware that her world was about to explode. The pounding on the door made her jump. "Sophie Hartford, open up." Terror spiked through her. She knew that tone authority mixed with urgency. Who is it?" "Marcus Giovanni, sent by Grace. You need to come with me. Now." "I don't know you. I'm calling the police." Sophie's hands shook as she grabbed her phone. "Call Grace first. She'll explain." Sophie dialed with trembling fingers. Grace answered on the first ring. "Soph, it's okay. Go with Marcus." "Grace, what's happening?" "I'll explain everything. But you need to leave. Right now. Please trust me. I'm scared. I know. Me too. But trust me. Please." Sophie threw essentials into a bag clothes. Her textbooks, medications. Marcus's team swept the apartment efficiently, professionally. Within 3 minutes, they were heading for the door. That's when the black sedan appeared, cruising slowly past the building. "Get down!" Marcus shoved Sophie into the SUV as tires screeched. The sedan accelerated, windows rolling down. The chase through South Side was a nightmare. Sophie screamed as Marcus weaved through traffic, his team's other vehicles boxing them in, protecting them. Gunshots, actual gunshots, pinged off the SUV's armored body. "What's happening?" Sophie's voice was raw with terror. "Stay down." Marcus's voice was calm, controlled, but his hands were white-knuckled on the wheel. "Oh God, oh God, oh God." Sophie sobbed, curled on the floor, hands over her head. They lost the pursuers near the docks. Arrived at the Romano estate with Sophie shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Grace met them at the door and Sophie ran to her, nearly knocking her over. "Grace, you're safe now. You're safe." Grace held her sister tight, but her own hands trembled. "They shot at us. They had guns." "Grace, what?" The alarm shattered the moment. High, piercing, urgent. Marcus's radio crackled. "Movement on East Perimeter. Multiple vehicles." Alexander's voice cut through the chaos. "Panic room! Now!" Grace grabbed Sophie with one hand, Isabella with the other. Marcus led them through the house at a run. Downstairs Grace hadn't known existed, through a steel door that sealed behind them with a sound like a tomb closing. The panic room was small, underground, with concrete walls and a single dim light. Sophie hyperventilated in the corner. "What is this?" "Grace, what is this?" "I'm so sorry, Soph. I'm so sorry." Grace held both Sophie and Isabella, trying to stop her own shaking. Above them, shouting. Gunfire. Something heavy crashed. The sound of violence filtered through the thick walls, muffled but unmistakable. Isabella screamed, high and piercing, and covered her ears. Sophie was crying, gasping for air. Grace pulled them both close and did the only thing she could think of. she sang, softly, shakily. Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Sophie's voice joined hers, broken and terrified. The two sisters singing their mother's lullaby while death happened above their heads. 20 minutes. It felt like 20 hours. Then silence. The door unlocked with a mechanical click. Grace positioned herself between the entrance and the girls, ready to fight with her bare hands if necessary. Alexander appeared. His shirt had blood on it, dark stains across the white fabric. Isabella broke free and ran to him. "Daddy!" He caught her, checked her over with shaking hands. Then his eyes found Grace. "Everyone okay?" Grace stared at the blood. "Are you?" "Not mine. They're gone." Sophie stood slowly, eyes wide with shock. She looked at Alexander, really looked at him. At the blood, the hard set of his jaw, the gun barely concealed at his hip. Who is he? "It's complicated," Grace started. "I'm the man keeping you alive, both of you." Alexander's voice was flat, final. Sophie turned to Grace, understanding dawning with horror. "This is Mafia, isn't it?" Grace couldn't lie. "Not anymore." "Yes." The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Within minutes, they were packed and moving. A convoy of 3 SUVs, armed men, everyone moving with military precision. Isabella fell asleep in her car seat, exhausted by terror. Sophie sat rigid and silent, her hands clenched so tight her knuckles were white. Grace sat between them, trying to be a bridge, a shield, anything to protect them both. Alexander rode in the front passenger seat, phone in hand, managing his empire even in crisis. He looked back once, caught Grace's eyes. "I'm sorry. Don't." Grace's voice was hollow. "This is what I chose." The lie tasted bitter. She'd chosen to save Isabella at the diner. Everything after had been consequence. The drive to Wisconsin took 3 hours through darkness. Highway lights strobed past. Sophie stared out the window, unseeing. Isabella whimpered in her sleep. Grace held both their hands and wondered what she'd done, what she'd brought down on the only 2 people in the world she'd die to protect. The lake house appeared through the trees, cabin-style but fortified, isolated, surrounded by water and darkness, a different kind of cage. Safer, maybe, but still a cage. As they pulled up to the house, Grace looked at Sophie's haunted face, at Isabella's tear-stained cheeks, at Alexander's bloodied shirt. She thought she understood the cost of her choice, the danger, the sacrifice. But standing there in the darkness, she realized she'd understood nothing at all. The war had found them, and there was nowhere left to run. They arrived at the lake house at 11 at night. Sophie was beyond exhausted, her face pale and drawn, eyes red from crying. Grace took her sister to one of the bedrooms smaller than the Romano estate, but still too luxurious for girls who'd grown up sharing a sofa bed. Sophie sat on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing. "I'm scared." Grace sat beside her, pulled her close. "Me too. Can you stay?" Sophie's voice was small, childlike. The brave 18-year-old who'd argued with Grace about taking the job had disappeared, replaced by the 5-year-old who used to crawl into Grace's bed during thunderstorms. Grace lay down beside her sister, on top of the covers, always. Sophie fell asleep within minutes, her breathing evening out. Grace waited until she was certain Sophie was deep in sleep, then slipped out quietly. The house was dark, except for security lights outside, casting long shadows across the walls. Grace couldn't sleep, couldn't stop her mind from replaying the gunshots, Sophie's screams, Isabella's terror. Couldn't stop calculating how badly she'd miscalculated, how much danger she'd brought to the only people she loved. At 1 in the morning, she found herself drawn to the deck overlooking the lake, and found she wasn't alone. Alexander stood at the railing, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring out at the black water. He'd changed shirts, but Grace could still see the violence in his posture, the tension, the coiled readiness for more fighting. "Can't sleep either?" He didn't turn. "Never can." "May I?" He nodded, and Grace moved to stand beside him. Not too close, close enough. They stood in silence, listening to water lap against the dock, to night birds calling across the lake. "I'm sorry I brought this to your door," Grace finally said. Alexander turned then, his gray eyes finding hers in the darkness. "You didn't. I brought it to yours. By offering me a job, by existing in a world where everything I touch becomes a target." His voice was rough with something Grace couldn't name. "It's the nature of what I am, what I do. That's not, it's true." He cut her off gently. Maria knew it, died because of it. Grace's throat tightened. "Tell me about her." Alexander was quiet for so long, Grace thought he wouldn't answer. "Then, she was light, where I'm darkness." He took a drink, the whiskey catching moonlight, She saw good in me I don't possess, believed I could be something other than what my father made me. What happened? Pregnancy complications. The doctors said she needed surgery, that it was dangerous. She refused, said Bella was worth the risk. His voice cracked, just slightly. When she died giving me Bella, I thought, this is my punishment. For every life I've taken, every choice I've made, Maria died, and I got Bella. And I don't deserve either of them. Bella isn't punishment. Grace's voice was fierce. She's a gift I don't deserve. None of us deserve the gifts we're given. We just have to be worthy of them. Alexander looked at her, really looked, like he was seeing her for the first time. You're wise. Grace laughed bitterly. I'm tired. You're both. The conversation shifted, deepened. Alexander asked, why did you take the job? Really? Money. I told you. That's not all. Grace paused, weighing honesty against self-protection. Honesty won. No, it's not. She gripped the railing. When I saw Bella under that table, I saw every kid I couldn't save, including myself. What do you mean? The words came slowly, painfully. My mom died when I was 8. Cancer we couldn't afford to treat. My dad, he dealt with grief badly. Drank, got violent. Not with fists, mostly, but with words, with rage. Grace's voice shook. I was 12, trying to protect a 5-year-old from a drunk father who blamed us for existing. I know what it's like to be small and scared and unprotected. Grace, when I saw Bella, I couldn't not save her. Because no one saved me, not until I saved myself. Alexander's voice was rough. You're the strongest person I know. I'm terrified every single day. Strength isn't absence of fear. It's acting despite it. Grace turned to him. You sound like you know. I've been afraid for 5 years. Since Maria died. He set down his glass. Afraid I'll fail Bella. Afraid she'll hate me. Afraid she'll end up like me, trapped in a life she didn't choose. Surrounded by violence she can't escape. She won't. Because you love her. Is love enough? Grace met his eyes. It's all that matters. Something shifted in the air between them. Alexander stepped closer, and Grace's heart hammered against her ribs. Grace, I need to tell you something. Her mouth went dry. What? These past days? Watching you with Bella? He stopped. Started again. I've felt something I thought died with Maria. Alexander, hope. I've felt hope. Grace's breath caught. You can't. Can't what? Feel? Want? Need? He was close now. Close enough that Grace could feel his warmth. Tell me I'm imagining this. We can't do this. I work for you. Bella needs you. And so do I. You don't know me. I know you threw yourself over my daughter without hesitation. I know you're brave and stubborn and fierce. I know when you smile at Bella, my world gets brighter. I know. Stop. Grace's voice broke. Please stop. Why? Because I'm scared. Of me? Of this? Of falling? Of losing? Tears burned Grace's eyes. Everyone I've ever loved has left, died or disappeared or destroyed themselves. I can't survive losing anyone else. Alexander's hands cupped her face, gentle despite the violence those hands were capable of. What if we don't lose? Everyone loses eventually. Not always. His thumb brushed away a tear on her cheek. Grace, I'm not asking for forever. I'm just asking for now. This is insane. I know. We could die tomorrow. Then we should live tonight. Alexander. His name was half plea, half prayer. Tell me you don't feel this. Tell me I'm alone in this. And I'll walk away. I'll never mention it again. You can stay, care for Bella, and I'll keep my distance. His gray eyes held hers. But if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, don't run from me. Grace couldn't lie. She'd never been good at it. You're not alone. Then don't run. I'm not running. Grace's voice was barely a whisper. I'm falling. Alexander kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, tender, full of everything they couldn't say. 5 years of loneliness meeting 3 years of survival. Grace kissed him back like drowning, like breathing, like the first sunrise after endless night. When they broke apart, both shaking, Grace whispered, "What do we do now? We survive. Together. And Bella? We protect her. Together. And Sophie? Her too. All of us." Alexander pulled Grace against him, and she let herself be held. Let herself, for just a moment, stop being strong. I can't promise you safety. I can't promise you easy. But I can promise you this. You'll never face anything alone again. Grace leaned into him, her face against his chest where she could hear his heart beating. I'm still scared. So am I. A voice from the doorway shattered the moment. Grace? They separated quickly. Sophie stood in the shadows, wrapped in a blanket, her face unreadable. Bella's calling for you. Bad dream. Grace's face flushed. I'll go. She hurried past Sophie, couldn't meet her sister's eyes. Behind her, she heard Sophie's voice, hard and protective. She's been through enough. If you hurt her, I won't. Alexander's voice was steady. Men always say that. I'm not most men, no. Sophie stepped into the moonlight, and her face was fierce. You're worse. You're dangerous. You carry guns and people shoot at you and my sister. Her voice cracked. My sister has spent her entire life protecting me. Now she's protecting your daughter. But who protects her? I will. You mean that? With everything I am. Sophie studied him for a long moment. Then don't make her choose between you and safety. She's had to choose survival too many times. Let her choose happiness for once. I'll make sure she never has to choose again. Inside, Grace found Isabella sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face. Moonlight clutched tight. Grace, bad dream, dragons. Grace gathered the little girl into her arms. No dragons here, baby girl. Just you and me, and moonlight. You won't leave? Never. I promise. From the doorway, Alexander watched, his daughter in Grace's arms. Grace whispering comfort, singing softly. Something in his chest that had been frozen for 5 years began, slowly, to thaw. Everything had changed, and there was no going back. Friday morning brought Marcus and a manila folder thick with documents. Grace was in the kitchen making coffee when she heard voices in Alexander's study, low, urgent, planning. She shouldn't have been included. She was the caregiver, the outsider. But Alexander called her name. Grace, we need you. The study smelled like leather and whiskey, and decisions that could get people killed. Marcus spread papers across the desk, bank records, transaction logs, photographs of restaurants she'd never heard of. Moretti's weak point. Money laundering through a restaurant chain. Marcus tapped a highlighter trail through shell companies and offshore accounts. FBI's been investigating for months, but no hard evidence. Until now, Alexander leaned over the documents, his expression carved from stone. How'd we get this? Inside man. Moretti's accountant wants immunity. Gave us copies. Marcus looked up. We deliver this to the FBI. Moretti's too busy fighting federal charges to attack us. Grace's mind worked fast. How do you deliver it without implicating yourself? Anonymous drop. But anyone connected to Romano is watched. FBI knows our faces, our vehicles, our people. Alexander straightened. I'll do it. No. The word came out before Grace could stop it. Alexander's eyes cut to her. Grace, they know your face. They'll know your men. Grace stepped closer to the desk, her heart pounding. But they don't know me. Marcus's eyebrows rose. She's got a point, boss. Absolutely not. Alexander's voice went hard. Too dangerous. More dangerous than staying here forever? More dangerous than Sophie never going home? Grace met his eyes, refusing to back down. More dangerous than Bella growing up in hiding? Grace, I just told you I'd protect you, and I'm telling you I can do this. Walk into the FBI building, drop an envelope, walk out. 5 minutes. She's right. Sophie's voice came from the doorway. All three turned. Sophie stood there in jeans and a sweatshirt, arms crossed, chin raised. And I'm coming too. No. 3 voices in unison. 2 random women look less suspicious than one. Sophie walked into the room like she belonged there. A waitress and a college student dropping off information they found. Who's going to question that? Sophie? No, Grace started. You've protected me my whole life, Grace. Let me help. Let me protect you for once. Alexander looked at Grace with something close to desperation. This is insane. This whole thing is insane. Grace's voice was steady. But it's the only way out. Silence stretched. Marcus watched Alexander, waiting. Alexander stared at Grace like he could will her into changing her mind. But Grace had made her decision. She'd walked into danger once for Isabella. She could do it again for all of them. Fine. Alexander's jaw was tight enough to crack teeth. But my rules. Marcus drives. You're both wired. Any sign of trouble, you abort immediately. Understood? Agreed. The preparation took an hour. Tiny microphones fitted under Grace and Sophie's collars. So small they were invisible. Marcus reviewed the plan 3 times. Federal Plaza, downtown Chicago. Walk in, drop the envelope at reception, claim they found it near a restaurant, leave. Don't engage. Don't answer questions. In and out. Grace dressed in jeans, a hoodie, glasses she didn't need. Trying to look like someone forgettable. Sophie wore her college sweatshirt, carried a backpack full of textbooks. Two ordinary women on an ordinary errand. Isabella found Grace by the SUV, moonlight dragging on the ground. Where going? Grace knelt down, pulled the little girl into a hug. Just a quick trip, sweetie. Back for dinner. Promise? Isabella's gray eyes were wide, worried. I promise. Grace kissed her forehead, breathing in the smell of Isabella's shampoo, trying not to think about promises she might not be able to keep. Alexander walked Grace to the vehicle, his hand on her elbow, his touch burning through her sleeve. I should be going, not you. But I am. Grace turned to face him. And I'll be fine. If anything happens, it won't. She tried to sound confident. Grace, He stopped, the words caught in his throat. Grace kissed him quickly, tasting coffee and worry. Don't. Say it when I get back. She climbed into the SUV beside Sophie. Marcus started the engine. As they pulled away, Grace looked back to see Alexander standing in the driveway, Isabella in his arms, both watching her go. The drive to Chicago took 2 hours. Sophie sat close to Grace in the back seat, their shoulders touching. You love him. Sophie's voice was quiet, matter of fact. Grace's throat tightened. What? Alexander, you love him. It's complicated. It always is. Sophie took Grace's hand. But do you? Grace looked out the window at trees rushing past. Yes. Does he love you? I think so. Then we get through this. For that, Grace squeezed her sister's hand. For that, Marcus's voice cut through the moment. 20 minutes out, Federal Plaza was all glass and steel and American flags. Marcus parked a block away, positioned so he could see the entrance. Remember, in and out. Don't engage. His eyes were serious in the rearview mirror. Anything feels wrong, you walk away. I'll handle it. Grace and Sophie walked to the building like they had every right to be there. Security checkpoint at the entrance, metal detectors, guards with bored expressions. Purpose of visit? Grace's mouth was dry. Dropping off information. What kind of information? About a crime. We found it. The guard's expression sharpened. Found it. Where? Sophie jumped in smoothly. In a dumpster, near a restaurant where I work part-time. You'll need to fill out witness forms. Can we just leave it? We're late for class. Step to the side, please. In the observation room, 1 floor up, Agent Sarah Chen was reviewing security footage from an unrelated case when Grace's face appeared on the monitor. Sarah leaned forward, frowning. Wait. Zoom in on camera 3. The technician complied. Sarah's eyes widened. I know her. That's Grace Hartford from Rosie's diner. She stood quickly. What's Grace Hartford doing at the FBI? At reception, Grace handed the envelope to a woman in a pantsuit. We found this. It has information about money laundering. Restaurant businesses. The receptionist reached for forms. I need your contact information, Grace Hartford. Grace's blood turned to ice. She turned slowly to see Agent Sarah Chen approaching, recognition and confusion on her face. Grace? What are you doing here? Grace's mind raced. Agent Chen. Hi. I found this envelope. Thought I should bring it in. Found it where? Near my work. Someone left it. Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly. At Rosie's diner? No, her new job. Sophie's voice was calm, confident. Office cleaning downtown. Sarah studied them both. Professional instincts clearly firing. This isn't drugs, is it? Human trafficking? No. Grace's protest was genuine. Just financial documents. I thought you should see them. Sarah took the envelope, opened it. Her expression changed as she scanned the first page. Okay, we'll look into it. Can you stay to give a statement? We really need to go. Class? Grace gestured to Sophie's backpack. Finals week. They started walking toward the exit. Behind them, Sarah was already on her phone, voice urgent. Wait, Miss Hartford. This is Grace, and Sophie ran. Out the doors, down the steps, into the SUV. Marcus already had it moving before the doors closed. Go, go, go. The SUV accelerated hard, throwing them back against the seats. Grace looked through the rear window and saw not FBI agents but black sedans pulling out from side streets. Marcus swore. We've got company. What? Grace's heart stopped. Gunfire, the sharp crack of bullets hitting metal. Sophie screamed, hands over her head. Grace pulled her down, covered her like she'd covered Isabella, history repeating with sickening familiarity. Marcus's voice was calm despite the chaos. Boss, we're hit. Headed east. Alexander's voice crackled through the speaker. Where? Toward the docks. A sedan rammed them from the side. The SUV spun, tires shrieking, hit a concrete barrier with a crunch of metal and glass. Get out! Run! Grace grabbed Sophie, hauled her from the smoking vehicle. They ran between warehouses, Sophie stumbling, Grace half carrying her. Behind them, men shouted, footsteps pounding. Sophie tripped on broken pavement. Grace caught her, pulled her up. Come on, Soph, come on. Hands grabbed Grace from behind. Strong, professional. She fought, kicked backward, felt her heel connect with someone's knee. A fist hit her temple, stars exploding in her vision. Got them! Sophie was screaming Grace's name. Grace fought harder, teeth and nails and desperation. Someone kicked her legs out from under her. She hit the ground hard, tasted blood. Grace! Something sharp pricked Grace's neck. Immediately, the world went soft, distant. She saw Sophie being grabbed, struggling, saw a needle, saw her sister's eyes roll back. No. Grace tried to crawl towards Sophie, but her arms wouldn't work. The world tilted sideways. Darkness rushed in. Her last thought was of Alexander's face, of Isabella's promise, of all the things she'd never get to say. At the lake house, Alexander's radio went silent mid-sentence. Marcus, Marcus, static. Marcus, report. Nothing. Alexander's hands were white-knuckled on the radio. He looked at the GPS tracker on his phone. Marcus's SUV had stopped moving. Warehouse district, the docks, Moretti's territory. Get every man. Alexander's voice was deadly calm. Now, he looked at Isabella playing in the corner, oblivious. At the life he'd built, fragile as spun glass. At everything he stood to lose. Grace had thrown herself over his daughter once. Now it was his turn. Grace woke to pain. Her head throbbed where she'd been hit, vision swimming in and out of focus. She tried to move and couldn't. Her wrists were bound to a chair with zip ties cutting into her skin. The warehouse was dark, except for a few industrial lights hanging from rusted chains. Grace! Oh God, Grace, wake up! Sophie. Grace's head snapped toward her sister's voice, sending fresh waves of agony through her skull. Sophie was tied to a chair 3 feet away, tears streaming down her face, terror making her look 12 years old again. Soph. Grace's voice came out rough, broken. You okay? They hit you. You were bleeding. There's so much blood. Grace tasted copper in her mouth, felt dried blood crusted on her temple. I'm okay. Are you hurt? No, just scared. Grace, where are we? What's happening? Before Grace could answer, footsteps echoed through the warehouse. A man emerged from the shadows, late 40s. Expensive suit that looked wrong in this place of rust and decay. A smile that held no warmth at all. Vincent Moretti. Grace Hartford. His voice was smooth, cultured, the voice of someone who gave orders and watched people die. The waitress who saved Romano's little princess. The woman who delivered evidence to the FBI. He circled them like a shark. You've caused me considerable trouble. Grace lifted her chin despite the fear clawing at her throat. Let my sister go. She has nothing to do with this. Oh, but she does. She's leverage. Moretti's smile widened. Romano's weakness isn't just his daughter anymore. It's you. And your sister? Well, she's leverage against you. Sophie's voice shook. Please, we don't know anything. You delivered FBI evidence to Agent Chen. You think I don't have people there? I knew the moment you walked into Federal Plaza. Moretti leaned close to Grace, his breath hot on her face. Romano will come for you. And when he does, I'll kill him. And you'll watch before I kill you too. Grace met his eyes. He'll kill you first. The slap came fast, snapping Grace's head sideways. Sophie screamed. Grace tasted fresh blood, felt her lips split. Big words for a small woman tied to a chair. Across the city, Alexander's convoy tore through streets, sirens ignored, traffic laws meaningless. Marcus sat beside him, blood seeping through a makeshift bandage on his arm, but his eyes were alert, his gun loaded. Boss, we've got 12 men inside. Moretti's confirmed in the building. Alexander checked his own weapon with mechanical precision. I'm going in. Wait for SWAT backup, no time. Alexander's voice was flat, final. Grace could be dead in minutes. Marcus met his boss's eyes and saw something he'd never seen before, fear. Raw, naked fear. Then we go together. Alexander's jaw set. Anyone who touches them dies. Inside the warehouse, Moretti was on his phone, pacing. Romano's coming. Get into position. When he enters, wait for my signal. His men spread out, weapons ready, faces hard with the promise of violence. Grace looked at Sophie, tried to pour every ounce of love and strength she had into her voice. Whatever happens, close your eyes. Don't watch. Just close your eyes. Grace, I'm scared. I know, baby. Me too. Grace's voice broke. But we're tough, remember? Hartford girls are survivors. We've survived everything. We'll survive this. The explosion came without warning. The east entrance blew inward in a shower of wood and metal. Gunfire erupted immediately, Alexander's men pouring through the breach, Moretti's men returning fire. The warehouse became hell. Moretti moved fast, grabbing Grace and hauling her chair backward, a knife appearing in his hand and pressing against her throat. The cold steel kissed her skin, sharp enough to draw blood. One more step. Romano! Alexander appeared through the smoke, gun raised, his face a mask of controlled fury. But his hands trembled slightly as he saw Grace, saw the knife, saw the blood on her face. Let them go. This is between us. No. Moretti's breath was hot against Grace's ear. This is how you lose. This is how I destroy everything you've tried to build. Your daughter watches her father die, and your woman dies knowing it's her fault. Grace met Alexander's eyes across the warehouse. Everything slowed. The gunfire faded to background noise. She saw the fear in his face, the love, the desperation. She mouthed 3 words. I love you. Alexander's face shattered. Grace didn't think. She remembered being 12 years old, standing between Sophie and their father, remembered the self-defense moves she'd learned at the women's shelter, remembered that surviving meant fighting even when you were terrified. She stomped down hard on Moretti's instep, felt bones crunch. He howled, his grip loosening just enough. Grace threw her elbow back into his ribs with everything she had. The knife sliced her neck shallow, burning, but she broke free. Alexander's shot was perfect. Moretti's shoulder exploded in red, the knife clattering to the concrete. Grace, still tied to the chair, fell forward. Alexander was there in seconds, catching her, the chair and all. I've got you. I've got you. Grace was sobbing, shaking, bleeding. Sophie, I'm here! Marcus was already cutting Sophie free, the girl launching herself at her sister the moment the ties broke. The sisters held each other, both crying, both alive. The gunfire had stopped. Moretti's men were down or surrendering. Sirens wailed in the distance, FBI, police, an army of law enforcement descending on the docks. Agent Sarah Chen was the first through the door. Weapon drawn, FBI jacket stark in the dim light. She took in the scene, Grace bleeding, Sophie crying, Alexander Romano with a gun still in his hand, Vincent Moretti writhing on the ground. Grace? Sarah's voice was careful, professional. You're with Romano? Grace looked up, exhausted beyond words. It's complicated. Moretti was screaming as they cuffed him, screaming threats and promises of revenge that meant nothing now. The FBI had his documents. His empire was crumbling. He'd lost. Medics appeared, trying to treat Grace's wounds, but Alexander wouldn't let them take her, wouldn't let go. Finally, Grace touched his face. I'm okay. Let them help. As a medic cleaned and bandaged the cut on her neck, Alexander knelt beside her chair. His hands were shaking now, all the control gone. You said don't say it. But I'm saying it. I love you, Grace Hartford. I love you. Grace's tears came fresh. I know. I love you too. Sophie stood nearby, arms wrapped around herself. She looked at Alexander, and her voice was fierce. You better take care of her. Alexander met her eyes. With my life. The drive back to the lake house was quiet. Sophie fell asleep against Grace's shoulder. Grace stared out the window, one hand pressed to her bandaged neck, the other held tight by Alexander. The lake house appeared through the trees, and Isabella burst out the door before the SUV even stopped. Gracie! Grace dropped to her knees, ignoring the pain, and caught the little girl in her arms. I'm okay, baby girl. Isabella was crying, clutching Grace like she'd never let go. You promised. You came back. Always. I'll always come back to you. That night, they sat together in the living room. Grace bandaged but alive, Sophie wrapped in blankets, Isabella refusing to leave Grace's lap. Alexander with his hand on Grace's shoulder like an anchor. It's over. Alexander's voice was quiet. Moretti's organization is exposed. The FBI has everything. His empire's finished. Grace leaned back against him. So we're safe? As safe as my world gets. Grace thought about that. About the fortress and the guards and the life of looking over shoulders. About loving a dangerous man and protecting a precious child and building a family from broken pieces. Then that's enough. Sophie looked at them, her sister, the man who'd saved them, the little girl who'd claimed Grace's heart. Something in her expression softened. Yeah, Sophie said quietly. That's enough. Outside, guards patrolled. The threat was ended, but others would come. That was the nature of Alexander's world. But inside, in this moment, they had peace, had each other, had love built from courage and choice, and refusing to give up. Grace closed her eyes, felt Isabella's steady breathing, felt Alexander's warmth, heard Sophie's soft laughter at something Marcus said. This was her family now, complicated, dangerous, imperfect, but hers, and she'd fight for it, always.